पार्थाय प्रतिबोधितां भगवता नारायणेन स्वयं व्यासेन ग्रथितां पुराणमुनिना मध्ये महाभारतम् अद्वैतामृतवर्षिणीं भगवतीम् अष्टादशाध्यायिनीम् अम्ब त्वामनुसन्दधामि भगवद्गीते भवद्वेषिणीम् यं ब्रह्मा वरुणेन्द्ररुद्रमरुतस्तुन्वन्ति दिव्यैस्तवैः वेदैः साङ्गपदक्रमोपनिषदैर्गायन्ति यं सामगाः ध्यानावस्थिततद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यं योगिनो यस्यान्तं न विदुःसुरासुरगणाः देवाय तस्मै नमः. We are continuing our discussion on the 17th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. We are discussing three different characteristics of human behavior, human conduct, and human character. Three different levels called Trigunas. The highest is Sattva-guna, the purest and the most exalted one. And the lowest is Tamo-guna, and the middle one is Rajo-guna. So these gunas in a way determine and define and constitute our character, our emotions and feelings, the way we interact, the way we talk, the way we take life as a whole. So these temperaments, these characteristics can be reflected on different areas of human conduct. So this text in this particular chapter, during the last few sessions, we are discussing how these characteristics reflect the way we practice charity, the way we practice rituals, and the way we practice austerity. So I have already discussed the earlier part of this topic, and now we are discussing what is called the most exalted form of physical austerity. Deva Duja Guru Prajna Pujanam Shaucha Marjavam Brahmacharya Mahimsacha Shariram Tapa Uchyade. So you can see this, I think it is the 14th verse. Now, different kinds of tapa. So tapa actually means anything that we do with a lot of concentration, with a lot of intensity. It could be a mental activity, it could be expressed in words, it could also involve physical activity. This also can be of Sattvika, Rajasiga, and Tamasiga means. For example, when we do things with great care and attention, with a sense of sanctity and sacredness, with care for the minute details, it can be called Sattvic. When it is done without any care, with total disregard for traditions and values, Tamasiga, the lowest, and in between you call Rajasic. So the 14th verse will tell you something about this. According to Gita, those who practice physical austerity with a great respect, with a tradition, with a great sense of sanctity and sacredness for certain spiritual values, and also a respect for our inherited culture and traditions. So it's very important. Maybe there's something quite alien in modern times. Human civilization has a huge store of accumulated values, cultural values, civilizational values that shaped different civilizations. In the Western context, as I mentioned earlier, I discussed earlier, the Greco-Roman tradition, which now one may wonder how can we practice the values of ancient Greek society, Athens, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, Philo, Porphyry, in modern times? Does it have any relevance? We may think that way. Oh, is there any any point in discussing Marcus Aurelius, the great philosopher king of the 2nd century Rome. One may think, rather in modern times, in this Silicon Valley, in the Bay Area, you work hard to make as much money as possible. And everything is valued on the basis of how much money it can bring us, how much more physical comforts it can bring us. That's how we value things in modern times, these crude utilitarian values, without any regard for the higher exalted values which shaped the earlier periods of Western civilization. I'm just giving the context of Western culture and tradition. So, now, when we completely forget these essential values and focus exclusively on the current, the existing way of life, we are disinheriting ourselves of a great cultural tradition, or treasure, the treasure of ancient culture, values. So, when you pay respect and reverence to these ancient values, and then you apply your physical body, energy into science and technology, whatever it is, it can be called sattvic tapas. But suppose you forget everything and just focus exclusively on the current, the dominant values of modern times, just crude utilitarianism, and everything judged in terms of the most the most external, the grossest kinds of physical enjoyments. If it doesn't bring extra money and profit, it is no value. If it brings a few more dollars, it is wonderful. That kind of attitude can be suicidal for the survival of human culture. That's why the Gita tells you that values like chastity, non-violence, respect for tradition, respect for the lineage of teachers and sages of the past, all these are important for the survival of human society. When we practice this, it is called physical austerity. And then again, I mentioned this, I gave a long discussion, you can read the previous session. There's also a kind of austerity in conversation. I actually quoted a long verse, several verses from the Valmiki Ramayana, where the choicest, the most exalted form of conversation, how human conversation, the words we use in our conversation, not only reflect our culture, but also shape our culture. A person who goes on repeating very bad words as a habit, he cannot end up being a good person. Maybe a very innocent person may speak bad words, but this the repetition of words will have a long-standing effect on the human conduct, culture and tradition. So, behavior, everything. So, when you speak with politeness, without creating anguish or anxiety and worry to the listener in an agreeable tone. I gave a long description, you can listen to the previous session, where we discussed this entire subject of the Vedic concept of conversation, the choice of words, what should be the effect of our talk and conversation among the listener's mind. So, and also this modern concept of talking, bluntly speaking everything in a very bluntly, say as it is or talk as it is, which actually kind of is a violation of the fundamental principles of civilized conversation. So that is also anudvegakaram vakyam satyam priyahidam chayet swadhyaya abhyasanam chaiva vangmayam tapa uchyate. How to practice austerity in conversation. One should talk in a way that the listener feels agreeable, but it should not be an act of pampering or flattering or seek a fancy. It should not deviate from truth, but at the same time, it should not be a blunt way of talking in a way that creates pains in the listeners. So, that is a spiritual way of conversation. So, there can be spirituality in everything, not only in our philosophy of life, but even in our conversation, the words we choose, the way we speak, all can be spiritual. So, please listen to the previous session, because it's not possible to repeat the entire discussion again. And then the third one is mental austerity. Mental austerity means manaprasada saumyattam maunam atma vinigraha bhava samshuddhi ityeda tapo manasam uchyate. So serenity, kind of being in a sense of balance, keeping the mind in a state of emotional balance, not being too excited, too anguished, too much worried, or too much enthusiastic. Keeping the mind in a state of balance. And an expression of serenity, kindliness, and also the ability to use silence as a mode of conversation, because silence also is a kind of language. When we don't speak, the absence of speech also is a language. It becomes a language. By not speaking, we speak a lot in certain circumstances. So the maunam atma vinigraha, and self-restraint, self-control. Bhava samshuddhi means practicing honesty and sincerity and integrity in our dealings with others. That's one way of mental austerity, a spiritual way of practicing mental austerity. So that we already discussed in the last few sessions. Now, any person who practices this physical austerity or bringing spirituality into the way we do things, the way we speak things, the way we express things, keeping mind in a state of balance, not pretentiousness, mind you. If you undergo training in diplomacy or in salesmanship, we learn how to speak properly, but with a lot of anguish. That doesn't help, really speaking. So that's why this text tells you that bhava samshuddhi means mind, word, that is, mind means thought, word and deed should be identical to each other. Then only this serenity, serene expression really becomes helpful. Trained, tutored or drilled expression, diplomacy, you learn how to be a flight assistant or salesman in a shop. You have to talk very politely to keep the customers. So not that kind of artificial serenity, but keeping the mind in a state of perfect balance and harmony. And, of course, speaking words in a way without creating anguish to the listeners. And also acting accordingly. All these together is called Sattvika Tapaha. That is the meaning of the 17th verse. Actually, we discussed this already. So now we will come to one important subject, that is 18th verse. You can listen to, so I've got the text, 18th verse. Satkaramana pujartham tabo dambhena chaivayat kriyade tadiha proktam rajasam chalam adhruvam. So now, the highest austerity was mentioned in the 17th verse. That is, when a person practices these triple forms of austerities, in short, in a way, a spiritual way of thinking, conversation, doing things, and not in general, the entire human conduct. That is called physical austerity. Now, when you combine all this, it becomes Sattvika. Then, in the 18th verse, Rajasika is mentioned. We practice all these, but we do this with a purpose. We want to be respected by others. Suppose we practice sweet conversation, trained and tutored, the result of maybe your training in diplomacy, in the art of negotiation, art of deal, as you may call it. So, but the purpose is to get respect and acceptance from people. It's good, it's better than being crude, but it's not, it doesn't belong to the most exalted type of austerity. When we practice bringing spirituality into conversation, into talking, into doing things, into thinking and expressions, naturally, with a mind that is thought, word, and action all in one line, that is a spiritual way of practicing all these values. The same thing when we do to show off our qualities, then it is called Satkara Mana Pujartha, means for getting honor, respect and acceptance from people, with an inner desire to be honored on a public platform. There's a lot of ostentation, pretentiousness. Then what happens? It belongs to the second category. Chalam adhruvam. Chalam means moving. It is shaky. It is not fixed. Well, when one may get training in sophisticated conversation, keep smiling all the time, is part of a professional duty. That doesn't remain all the time. And when after some time, mind goes back to its original form. So it's called chalam and adhruvam. Adhruvam means impermanent, unsteady. Chalam means it always is, it is shaky, is moving from one to another. One may get extremely depressed after doing the duty, which requires you to keep a smiling face all the time and polite conversation. But after that, when we return from the office, mind again becomes. So that's a very interesting observation in this book. So it should be natural. It's always better to be natural than unnatural. Any unnatural expression is a recipe for problems for the mind. We can imagine modern times, Of course, modern civilization, modern way of conduct won't permit people to express their natural sentiments, Because you have to say, hi, how are you, wonderful, fine, everything wonderful, have a great day. You have to say that. It's part of conversation. So there is a layer, there is a difference between, very often, not always, between what we actually feel and what we express verbally. So this conflict, actually, it does a lot of harm to the human mind. When human mind is not allowed to express its natural expression, not to give its natural expression, what happens is, it does a lot of harm to the mind. It hurts the mind. So this is a very important thing to remember. That's why it's okay, but it should be done naturally, steadily. So that's a humility and simplicity are two different things. Humility can be assumed humility, which often, but that may not always be helpful. So that's why this text tells us that it should not be as a part of exhibition or showmanship that one practices serenity, politeness, respect for others, not to show off, not as part of ostentation, but rather as a natural genuine context. This discussion is very, very interesting actually. And there is a 19th verse that is very interesting. Mudagrahena atmano yet pidaya kriyate tapaha parasyo sadhanartham va tattamasam udakrutam. There is another kind of austerity which is the worst form of austerity. When we talk about austerity, we find in Hindu mythology, in Christian mythology, in different religious mythological works, in Buddhism and so on, you find great men. The Buddha himself was an example of this extreme austerity. It said that, when Buddha sat under a tree, he took a strong decision. The decision was, I won't get up from this seat before I realize the supreme truth, before I get supreme enlightenment. That was the decision that Buddha took. I don't have to repeat the story of Buddha again. Everyone knows. If you have any doubt, you can ask during interaction. So Buddha walked from his city, from his palace, almost 200 miles, came to Bodh Gaya, sat under a tree with a strong determination. So, ihasane sushudu me shariram tugasti mamsam cha vilayam chayatu aprapi siddhim bahujanma durlabham naivasanat kayamataschalishide. The decision in English language means, I'm going to sit under this tree and meditate. I won't get up from this seat before I get full enlightenment. That was the strong determination that Buddha took at the beginning of his practicing austerity, meditation. So it was an extreme kind of austerity. So the 19th verse actually tells you that any kind of self-torture is not desirable. It is the lowest form of austerity. But there is a reason for it. If a spiritual seeker is happy if he can withstand extreme austerity with joy, without losing his mind, if it helps him to connect with the transcendental, then that austerity is sattvika. In Buddha's case, remember, he was a great prince. He was 28 years old and is living in the palace where he was not allowed to have any negative experience. He had no idea of the darker side of human life, human existence. So one day, he was already a young man who was going to be the heir apparent after his father's passing away, the next king, and his charioteer took him on a ride in the city, Lumpini, to today's Nepal. And as he was driven along the streets of the city, he had three experiences, three visions of human life. He saw a dead body being taken to the cremation ground. So death was something new that he never even heard of, because his father did not allow him to see any of the darker aspects of human life. Because the astrologer had predicted that a Buddha, by the time of his death, the Buddha ever happened to see any dark aspects of human life, poverty, sin, poverty, sickness, illness, some tragedies, Buddha immediately will renounce his worldly life and become a mendicant, a monk. So the prediction. So his father took care not to let him see the darker side of human life. So the first time in 28 years old, his prince saw the reality of death, a dead body being taken to the cremation ground. Then he saw a sick man sitting in a street corner, the reality of sickness, illness. And then he saw a very old man who was walking, limping in the street. So old age. He never knew such a thing really existed, old age, death and sickness. So that day, That night rather, he left his home, his palace, and that was the beginning of his spiritual quest. Now such a man may practice extreme austerity. That's not self-torture for him. That is his royal highway to spiritual enlightenment. But normal people should not do anything like a self-torture. So that's the meaning of this 19th verse. Mudhagrahena atmano yet. Due to some misunderstanding, some misconception, without following any principles of moderation, if somebody practices self-torture, inflicting pains, wounds on the human body, these are some of the practices we find in some traditions. It's not proper. So even austerity should be moderate. So pidaya kriditapha means inflicting pain to oneself. That is parapida. And then parasya utsadanartham va. So parasya utsadanartham means actually it's a reference to certain practices which existed in many ancient societies. Black magic, certain practices which are meant to do harm to others. All these are examples of the most despicable, the most undesirable forms of austerities. So you can see in ancient Hindu mythology, when there was a Bhasmasura, very interesting, there is a bit of a comedy in that story. Bhasmasura was a demon, and he belongs to this category. He was not a good person. So he wanted some supernatural powers. So he started practicing meditation to deity Shiva. And he practiced extreme austerity, self-torture. But Shiva knew that this man's real purpose was different. He wanted to do a lot. He wanted to inflict pain. He wanted to do a lot of harm to people in society. So he wanted, it's almost like Bin Laden getting a nuclear bomb, He's not the right man to, if you want to give a nuclear bomb, he's not the right man to give, So if an evil man gets some supernatural powers, it will lead to a lot of disaster in the world. So this man was practicing austerities, meditation. Ancient people believe that if you do all this, you get some special mental powers. You can attract people, you can influence people, you can make people do things for you, you can enslave people mentally and spiritually. Terrible things. So people do all sorts of this, they call necromancy, black magic. Many of the ancient civilizations had this. It's not scientifically proven, but in Hindu tradition, this is condemned as a most despicable thing. So Bhasmasura was such a gentleman, a demon. So he practiced it for a very long time. Now if you pray to God for something and you punish yourself, otherwise he will kill himself. So Shiva appeared. Shiva, he only wanted one boon. That is, he lifted his right hand. Whomever I touch with my right hand on his head, he should die immediately. That was the wonderful power he wanted, this man, this demon. If he puts his hand upon anybody, that person should die. This is what he wanted. But Shiva knew he was a very evil person. So Shiva gave him, but also made sure that he will be taught a lesson in course of time. So he wanted to practice and test this new power on Shiva's head himself. That's the idea behind. The deity, the angel, we may call supernatural, celestial being, gave him this unique boon. He was not sure it will really work. So he wanted to put his hand on Shiva's head to test the power of this that he has received. And Shiva, of course, ran away. It's a mythological story, but there's a great lesson behind the story. There are mythological stories you find in all traditions. Finally, Vishnu came and he wanted to test his power by touching Vishnu's head. Vishnu told him, keep quiet, wait a minute. Now Shiva gave you this boon. Do you think it's going to work? It's absolute rubbish. Don't take seriously. Otherwise, you test it on your own head, nothing will happen to you. I can guarantee. And he put his hand on his own head and he died on the spot. So these are such interesting stories you find. So that's why in the 19th verse, so people who are totally deluded and mistaken, a wrong idea of practicing austerity, they practice self-torture and they want to do harm to others, and also they want to acquire some special powers, and for that they do extreme austerity that is doomed to fail and doomed to disaster. So spiritual practices or any effort, even if you are studying for examinations, if you are doing a scientist doing research in a laboratory, if you are a painter doing a painting, our efforts or application should not exceed a limit. Beyond that, it becomes a self-torture, and that will not produce the desirable effect. That's the idea behind. It's almost like 300 degrees, If you push beyond the 180 level, it comes back to you. I say. If you think of a circle, beyond a level, it comes back to you. So it becomes a liability. It's good to strive for prosperity, but if it becomes an obsession, it becomes a self-inflicting pain. It becomes a self-torture. So, now after this, there is a very interesting discussion. That's something very profound. We'll discuss this in the light of the commentaries. That now, charity. We practice charity. So, how we should practice charity? There is a highly exalted way of practicing charity. There is a very despicable, the most undesirable way of practicing charity. And there is a level in between the two extremes. That's a sub-discussion on the 20th verse. Datavyam idi yaddanam diyate anupakarini deshe kalecha patrecha taddanam sattvigam smrdam. Now, if we practice, let's say, it's my duty to give this to the person. So, I have an obligation to help this person. It is part of my own responsibility. And then we do this in the right manner, giving charity to a person who is in need of it, and who will use what we give to him for a creative purpose, for some constructive purpose. And do it in a proper manner, without looking down upon the person who is receiving help, not looking down upon the receiver, but looking at the whole thing as a sacred activity. That kind of charity is the most exalted form of charity. This is the idea behind. Datavyam idi yaddanam diyate anupakarini. Even knowing fully well that the person who is receiving help from us will not be in a position to return. He may not even be grateful to us for the help he receives. Still, if we practice charity, that kind of charity or philanthropy is the most exalted form of philanthropy. It's called dhanam. And then it should be done in the right place. If you help a person if you give a charity or make a donation or something in a very improper place or at an improper time, in an improper manner, all this cannot be called Sattvika Dhanam. So that is there is a very famous commentary in Shankaracharya's work in his Bhashyam here, which we want to discuss this. So Datavyam iti evam mana krutva yad dhanam diyati anupakarini pratyupakara asamarthaya samarthaya api nirapeksham diyati. So it means, suppose we consider this is something I have to do by virtue of my position, my sense of responsibility in society. You are maybe a rich person, you may get a request from somebody or some institution or organization for help, and you can afford to give that help without doing any harm to yourself, to your own financial position. And that's so you feel it's my duty to do. So, and you know very well that the person who gets this help, he may not know that you are the one who is helping him, or you cannot even expect any kind of return. That person may not be able to give back to you anything in return, or maybe may not be able to give back to you. So that's why, pratyupakara asamarthaya samarthaya api nirapeksham diyate. So you give your help to somebody without thinking whether that person will be able to return this help, this charity back or not. That is Sattvika, the most exalted, the most spiritual kind of practicing philanthropy. Deshe punni kurikshetradu. And if it is done in an auspicious place, so Kurukshetra is Kurukshetra is the very place where this Bhagavad Gita was taught to Arjuna. That approximately the date is 3226 BC. That means roughly around more than 5,000 years ago. So that's a place. That place called Kurukshetra, maybe around 80 kilometers, 50 miles from India's capital. So that place is considered to be a very auspicious place because that's a place where these great teachings were taught to Arjuna, a character in Mahabharata, by Lord Krishna. So when you practice charity, if you do it in a religious place, in an auspicious place, on an auspicious day, at an auspicious time, then it becomes helpful to the giver and also to the receiver. Every act of charity will produce some auspicious result. Any good action will loosen the karmic blocks. So what are karmic blocks, Where people often experience these karmic blocks. Suppose you are able to do certain things and you want to do that. All these circumstances are absolutely favorable. There is no problem anywhere. Still somehow your mind doesn't permit you to do. It is something that we can very easily do. People often find this situation. In its most chronic form, it becomes a psychiatric problem, but in its normal form, you can find many people go through this. Many things we want to do and we should do and we are capable of doing, we have a sincere desire to do. But when we actually try to do, one part of the mind creates a stumbling block. It's not just laziness, it's not procrastination or postponement. These are simple terms. Actually, the real cause goes beyond that. Technically, it is called karmic blocks in Buddhism. Karma is very important in Buddhism, actually. So also in Hinduism, Vedanta, and also in Jainism, and Patanjali Yoga Sutras. That's because a lot of our previous actions and their tendencies, every action produces tendencies. Many of the negative actions from previous life cycles which have created wrong samskaras, negative tendencies and vrittis, they are holding us back, preventing us from actually doing what we can do very easily, very naturally, even if the circumstances are favorable. It's called karmic block. Now, any kind of charity, any noble, unselfish activity, if you do, this activity will loosen these karmic blocks, and proportionately our mind becomes our friend. Our mind reduces its resistance to our effort to do things. So if this happens, suppose you just take a decision tomorrow onwards, you will start practicing meditation every day, 10 minutes, 20 minutes in the morning. But the time comes, somehow the mind produces a kind of a very unspeakable, inexplicable kind of objection. So immediately we read newspapers and we open the TV. Maybe tomorrow onwards I shall practice meditation, not today. So mind itself creates some excuses for not doing what we can do. The reason is karmic block. These karmic blocks can only be loosened by unselfish, noble activity. So this kind of practicing dhanam or charity is one way of reducing these karmic blocks. And it becomes more effective when it is done, when the charity is given to the right person, in the right place, and also in the right manner. So it should be given to the right person. Suppose we want to make a donation of a huge amount of money, we must know that the person who is receiving this help will not use this for a wrong purpose. You often find in international negotiations, nuclear know-how is not shared by they are very careful nuclear non-proliferation treaties and all that. If a rogue nation gets nuclear weapons technology, it can be a disaster to the world. If a wrong person, if a very greedy, evil person gets a lot of money, he can do more mischief than if you are poor. So any gift, anything that we get, it can be used for good and bad purpose. That's why patre you can find in the Gita, deshe kale cha patre. Desha means place. If you do it in a very auspicious place, in a spiritual place, the spiritual merit of doing charity, philanthropy will be multiplied. And if you do in an auspicious place and to the auspicious person, it will be actually good. Sankrantya. So I mean, Shankaracharya writes, Kurukshetrado, in places like Kurukshetra, Kali, Sankrantyado. Sankrantya actually is the sun's position according to Indian astrology. Marks the sun's transit from one zodiac sign to another, one Rasi to another Rasi. Makara Sankranti you can find in Indian tradition. So when the sun transits, moves from one position to another position, called Rashi, that is considered to be an auspicious time for doing auspicious things. Then Shadanga with Veda Parage, those who have studied the Veda, those who have exalted tradition of reading spiritual literature, who are leading spiritual life, Taddanam Snattikam Smatam. That kind of charity is absolutely good. There are interesting descriptions of other forms of charity. It's very interesting. So we will discuss this in the next session, next week. Then we can have interaction. You are most welcome to ask questions. Enough time. Okay. Thank you.
Namaskar, Swami. In section 14 of what chapter are we on here? 17. My translation has worship of the gods, the twice-born, and teachers. And so twice-born, Divja, anyway, members of one of the three highest castes. Why is that, or tell me what twice-born means.
I shall explain. So what that is, I think that is 14th verse. Is it so? 14, Deva, Duja, Kuru, Prajna, Pujanam, Shaujam, Archavam. Deva, in Hindu tradition, Deva is actually Indra, Varuna, Agni, all these are different celestial beings mentioned in the Vedic literature. More roughly like the angels who are living in heaven. Very similar to that. They are living in Surga. They are good. They reach that position because of their good meritorious deeds when they lived in this world. They become Devas. Deva means small. You can find in English written small letter G, gods. Small letter gods. Or you can say, roughly speaking, very similar to what you call angels in Christian tradition. Good celestial beings. Dvija, that means twice born. See, I tell you, three of the three groups in Hindu society, Brahmana, Kshatriya and Vaishya, they are supposed to have two births. One is when they are born. The second birth is when they are given the sacred thread along with Gayatri. Mantropadesha means giving the teaching, initiation into Gayatri mantra. So any kind of initiation can be called another birth. So Dvija means twice born. The normal birth, when we that's how we begin our life. Then at some point we will have a spiritual birth when we are initiated into any kind of spiritual discipline. Normally in ancient times, the Brahmana, Kshatriya and Vaishya, the three groups, they used to be given initiation into a chanting of Gayatri mantra, which makes them fit for studying the Vedas. That initiation is called the second birth. So that's the meaning of twice born. So they were expected to live role model life, at least traditionally in ancient times. They practiced austerity, they practiced meditation, they practiced non-violence, all these spiritual disciplines they are supposed to practice. So the beginning of the formal initiation into that practice is the second birth. So one should pay respect to the exalted, noble, good, in the sense, those who are living good life, we should respect them. We should respect good people in society. Actually, appreciation and respect of good people is one way of developing the same qualities in us. According to Patanjali Yoga Sutra and Vedanta, what quality you appreciate in others, that quality you will naturally develop. That's right. Suppose you can see in normal life, children who want to become great soccer players or football players in American football, what they appreciate in others. Somebody may respect you because you are a big sportsman, so they want to be sportsmen. Somebody may appreciate you if you are a big musician. Those persons may want to study music. So what quality we appreciate in others, that quality we develop in our own life. That's why it is important that a sattvic person, a good person, should be able to pay respect to and appreciate good persons in society. That's the idea. It's clear? Okay, thank you.
Good evening, Swamiji. You talked about karmic blocks, and I think from your previous other talks, the idea of vrittis and samskaras and vasanas and that whole antarakarana stuff. I was just curious, this is, with the karmic blocks, I know sometimes I've come across the term, say in Hatha Yoga, with the chakras, grunties.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking if that has anything to do with this, because I'm thinking of actually blockages of energy or consciousness.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could maybe elaborate on that. If there's...
Yeah. So that's true, from Mooladhara to Sahasrara, this chakra, So this evolution to transcending through, this constant ascent from Mooladhara up to Sahasrara, going through different chakras. That signifies the loosening and even the eventual disappearance of karmic blocks. As karmic blocks disappear, you get more and more spiritually enlightened, and it reflects this evolution in an ascending order of our levels of consciousness. These chakras are 6 levels of human consciousness. At the lowest level, Mooladhara, when a person is not far removed from the animal kingdom. Certainly, in terms of physical evolution, Darwin won't agree with you if you say they are the same level as animals. No, true. But in terms of human consciousness, not very far removed from the animal kingdom. But when you reach Sahasrara, you have reached the zenith, the epitome of your evolution of consciousness. So this ascending order signifies or reflects the gradual and proportionate loosening and eventual disappearance of karmic blocks. When the karmic blocks are completely gone, then you become fully enlightened. Sahasrara, that's the last stage.
To sort of follow up on that, so you mentioned, some different ways, I guess, the yoga tradition and the spiritual traditions in general to deal with these karmic blocks. I mean, you highlighted unselfish, noble activity. So I guess my follow-up question is partly practical, but also related to what you said about being natural, having natural, kind and noble speech versus sort of flattery and ostination, that sort of thing. So just, more practical with just other things that come to mind with effective ways to deal with the karmic blocks, and if it's related to the idea of being natural too.
Yeah, there are different ways to to remove karmic blocks. All the 3 yogas mentioned in the Gita, that is Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga. But the most natural beginning stage is Karma Yoga. Because if at the physical level at least, we can, without much difficulty, without much emotional resistance, we can apply ourselves to doing something good and noble, charitable, being kind to others, kind to animals, kind to other living beings. That's something anyone can do. So any noble activity will produce a spiritual energy in our mind. Even unconsciously, if you keep doing good things, without you being aware of it, you will be growing spiritually. So our actions do have an effect on our mind, just as our mind has a direct effect on the way we do things. There's no doubt about it. This is not frequently recognized in modern psychology. They recognize that if your mind is disturbed, your actions will be absolutely disturbed. That's true. When your mind is terribly disturbed, you can't give a talk, you can't even walk properly, you won't be able to pay attention to anything. You cannot do painting or music or anything. You can't do anything because mind is disturbed. So mind has a direct impact on whatever you do in physical activity, mental activity, thinking or speaking. But speaking and doing things also will affect the mind. That's not well recognized. When it is recognized, it is karma yoga. So what is karma yoga? Even if you do things, good noble things, with total selfishness, I want power, I want recognition, I want people to praise me, so I shall do something noble. Even that will have a positive effect. If the same action if you do without any ostentation, without any desire for recognition, that will have much more positive effect. This is an important thing to remember. So any kind of physical activity, mental activity, will have a positive effect. Noble activity will have a positive effect on the mind. If we can do great things, good things without any selfish motive, then it can elevate the mind to a very high level. It's an idea behind that.
So, just 3 is the magic number. So to follow up with that, with this idea, I'm just interested in this idea of being natural, where I was thinking of, it's existential philosophy, say post-World War II in Europe, with the idea of authenticity, or living in good faith versus bad faith. So I'm just curious about how you see what it is to be natural and how to enhance that quality of living a natural life.
The problem with modern existentialism or modern views, it has a value, it is important. The problem is it is a bit superficial. Because even its analysis of the human mind, just a set of emotions, positive psychology. So, people think that by improving our external behavior, our mind will change. That is totally wrong. These business management experts, they give this motivational speech. You can do that, you can do great things and all that. Actually, it works, but there is a limit. So if you pay $500 per session, 2-hour session, and you have to tell yourself, you will succeed, I will succeed, I will make a lot of profit, I will do great things. If you go on repeating this, it will certainly have an effect. But it doesn't solve your tendencies. Samskaras will not undergo any change. It may work for some time, again you get back to the previous day, again you for another $500. So I'm not condemning them, not making fun of them, but the point is, it's a bit superficial. It certainly is effective to some extent. People who are extremely dumb, depressed, it will work for them. But people who are suffering from serious emotional crisis, critical situation, it may not help much. So, on the other hand, if that person starts doing something good and noble, along with this, you can listen to motivational speech, that's wonderful. But along with that, you also start doing certain things, some noble activity. That will produce an unseen, unknown effect. To give an example, a simple example. Suppose tomorrow you get an email or maybe it's newspaper, whatever it is, social media. There is, let's say, people suffering from some countries, in war-torn countries and societies. They're asking for help. And you are not a very rich man, obviously, but you pay $100. Excuse me, I'm not giving you as an example. Just you mean general public. You may be a rich person. Maybe. So suppose you pay $100. Just $100. You find that day you get a feeling, I have done something sensible. Now nobody knows you have given this, you don't get any recognition for that. Rather actually you lose money. No recognition, nothing. Still, in your inner mind, you get the feeling, I have done something sensible. That is true also if you help somebody in places where people give shelter and food for homeless people. If you help them, the same thing happens to you. Why this happens? Externally, if you analyze, physical activity of losing $100, and what happens to your mind, you cannot prove in a laboratory that they are connected. But they are connected. When you do something noble, good and unselfish, it creates a positive effect on the mind. I have done something sensible. You may have spent millions of dollars, but $100 you have done for a good purpose. Why this happened? Because that activity produces a spiritual asset in your mind. When the spiritual energy is generated, we feel that kind of inner relief, a kind of inner contentment. It is the only way you can really prove that you have generated an emotional energy particle in the system, and you feel that.
Could you say that inner contentment, maybe santosha, is what to be natural, to sort of not be...
That will be very natural.
Yeah, okay.
That will be much more natural than if you get a news information that you got one lottery, $1 billion you got in some kind of game, something. This will be much more natural, much more deep-rooted, much more genuine.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you. So, thank you. Now we will continue our discussion in the next week, next Friday. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.